The Numbers Don't Lie. Chapter 2. This is... Twilight's mouth hung open as she levitated the silver cylinder of grimacing unicorn faces in the middle of the library. This is absolutely incredible! She looked aside. Where did you find this? It was Sweetie Belle and her charming friends who travailed upon it, I'm afraid, Rarity remarked from where she sat at a reading seat. The windows to the library rattled from a rising commotion in the village outside. I didn't think there was anything significant to it, besides a most charming luster, of course. She chuckled briefly, then sighed. Ahem, I do believe you see the obvious connection. She pointed at the silver totem, then at the zeros floating over each of their heads. Right, Twilight breathlessly nodded. I've been working all morning trying to come up with an answer to the mysterious flash of light that erupted all over town hours ago. She gingerly levitated the object over to a wooden table in the center of the room and placed it down. First there were the numbers, but now this. Could it be the cause of all the chaos that has befallen Ponyville? Rarity asked, craning her neck to gaze upon the shiny, shiny object some more. When Apple Bloom finally finished bawling her eyes out, the poor dear, her testimony matched that of the others. She's always the most honest of the darling little trio, as we could all guess. I'm definitely sensing a connection, Twilight remarked, squinting at the totem as her horn glowed with pulsating resonance. I feel a complex web of ley lines emanating at countless angles from this artifact. There's no doubt in my mind that it's responsible for the spell that's causing us to see the numbers. An ancient lie meter! Ha! Rarity flipped her blue bangs and smiled. Who could imagine such a thing? Twilight gazed thinly at her. Rarity, there's nothing to confirm that. But what else could it be, darling? Rarity grinned. You should have seen the three sprites as they stood on my doorstep, making one outrageous fabrication after another. Oh, the air positively rang with the sound of otherworldly bells as their numbers jumped. Only careful research will have an answer to all this. Speaking of which, Twilight spun and frowned across the room. Spike? I'm coming already, jeez. Spike stumbled down a series of steps, struggling to balance a thick, dusty tome in his arms. It's hard enough as it is to concentrate with all the ponies in town getting ready to riot outside. Oh, Spiky Wikey, Rarity cooed. They most certainly aren't rioting. She paused, then blanched after a few seconds. Are they? Anywho, I think I found something. Ye old equestrian curiosities. Spike raised the book up with a victorious smirk. Check it out! Twilight levitated the tome from his grasp. As the windows rattled nearby, she scanned the age-worn brown pages. Her eyes darted from the words to the illustration of a slender object before jumping off the pages to scrutinize the silver totem once more. This looks to be the right description, Twilight thought aloud. A silver rod of glowing might that exposes ponies to honesty's sight. Good heavens! Rarity did a double take. Does this infernal thing have a name? It says here that 200 years before the end of the Paleo-Pony period, a civilization known as the Trudian Empire existed in the center of modern-day Equestria. Twilight's lavender hoof slid across the page in question as she continued. It was a utopian society built on the principles of trust, pacifism, and communal autocracy. Apparently, the Trudian equines were so intent on living in cooperation with one another that they sought to achieve a oneness of mind. To that end, they built the 4 wands of binding. So, which wand is this? Spike asked, making an ugly face to match the unicorn effigies that comprised the totem. The wand of worst sculptor ever? Silver embossing, unicorn faces, glows with pale luminescence. Twilight's eyes wandered up from the tome. This is most definitely the Wand of Walling. Apparently, its purpose in the Trudian Empire was to reinforce a truthful community by exposing ponies to a quantifiable measurement of their own dishonesty. So then, Rarity smiled and fluffed her mane some more. A lie meter? Twilight rolled her eyes. Rarity, don't you get how serious this is? She leaned forward with a worried expression. We're dealing with magic that is older than neo-equestrian sorcery. I don't even have a spell in my entire library that can counter this sort of thing. She turned back to the book and pointed at another sheet. Also, it says here that once the spell has gone into effect, the immediate area surrounding the magical emanation shall remain continuously bound to the wand until the totem's power is nullified. Twilight bit her lip, then added, In other words, we're all stuck with these numbers so long as we stay in Ponyville, whether or not this artifact is taken away from here. So what does that mean? Spike asked as he glanced fitfully between the two unicorns and the rattling windows beyond. The entire town is stuck forever with these numbers floating over our heads? Surely there must be a way to undo this object's... Rarity shivered. Most garish blight. On my own? Unlikely. Twilight gazed out the window, murmuring in thought. But Princess Celestia... She brightened, her fuzzy ears twitching. Of course, she's an alicorn, and alicorn magic is the oldest and most powerful magic there is. Surely she could undo a binding spell brought upon us by a Trudian artifact. So send her a letter then, Rarity insisted. Or send her the totem itself. Twilight's ears drooped. That's just it. This Trudian magic is terribly old and unpredictable. I don't want to teleport it across the landscape and risk destroying it or something worse. Who's to know if the spell would become irreversible once the artifact is broken? We could have it flown to Celestia, Rarity insisted. Miss Hooves is always begging for side jobs these days. Spike cleared his throat. Rarity rolled her eyes, sighed, then said, Oh, very well then. Have Rainbow Dash do it. The mayor could use the extra bits. I thank you for such great ideas, Rarity. But this object has already proven to be dangerous and magically volatile. She bit her lip as she gazed at the shimmering totem. I don't want to risk affecting any other pony communities between here and Baltimore. Rarity made a confused face. Baltimore? What has Baltimore had to do with any of this? Twilight gave her a tired smile. Fate would have it that Princess Celestia is far away in Baltimore as we speak. She's paying an impromptu visit to examine the city's most recent damage from a nasty hailstorm. Even if we sent a letter to her and she received it right away, Celestia wouldn't be able to get here in a few days unless there was an emergency. Like this isn't one? Spike stammered. Oh, Spike! Rarity stroked his green scales and patted his shoulder with a wink. You underestimate the integrity of the ponies in this town. Spike gulped, still nervous from the commotion outside. Really? Look no further than your own mentor, Rarity gestured at Twilight. Why, if she's at such a low count, surely even more of our friends are remaining just as dedicated to truth and sincerity. Twilight glanced at her reflection in a picture frame. Sure enough, a glittering 0 hovered above her head. A humble blush washed across her cheeks as she snuck a glance back at her friend. Well, I've always valued pure honesty when dealing with the world. She fidgeted slightly. It's a virtue that Princess Celestia had taught me at an early age to respect. The way I see it, if you're completely honest with your friends, then you have the chance to solve problems as soon as they show up. Because at least you know that you're capably handling your end of the situation. Besides, it's a nice thing to be honest. Don't you agree? Oh, absolutely. Rarity rolled her eyes and chuckled elegantly. I am always honest with the ponies I love. There was a chiming sound. Twilight blinked. Rarity? Yes, darling? Rarity stared at her, then blinked. She glanced down at Spike. Spike was wincing and pointing at Rarity's skull. The fashionista lifted a compact mirror from the table and looked at the glaring 1 above her head. Her pale features blushed slightly. What I meant, Twilight, was that being honest has always served me in the past. Another chime. Twilight's gaze melted into a thin glare. Uh-huh. Oh, Rarity began to sweat as the mirror trembled in her magic grasp. I mean it. I at least endeavor to be more honest than Sweetie Belle. Chime. 3. She grimaced. I'm her one single role model and she looks up to me more than any pony. 4. Oh, for the love of... Rarity stumbled out of her seat, almost tripping over her elegant self. If you'll excuse me, I'm needed at the boutique, seeing as I have several half-finished dresses that need my immediate attention. 5. No, I'm most certainly not thinking about taking a long, steaming hot lavender bath to calm my nerves. 6. Ugh! With a regal hiss, she bolted out of the room like a pale comet. The library hung in silence after her exit. Spike blinked, then said, I love it when she gets angry. A pause. He glanced up at the 0 lingering over his head, then pumped his fist. Yes! Ha! Not such a baby dragon anymore, am I right? He turned towards Twilight with a grin. Twilight was gazing at her reflection again. Her bored eyes hung sadly on the shimmering silvery lips above her skull. Twilight? She snapped out of it, glancing his way. Yes, Spike? So, He stirred where he stood. Should I send that letter to the princess now? You know, asking her to help cleanse Ponyville of this curse? Twilight glanced between him and the glowing Trudian artifact. I almost wish we didn't have to. His scaly brow furrowed. Twilight? Ahem, yes, prepare a letter, Spike. Twilight paced around the shimmering totem. I'm heading outside to give the town an update. I wouldn't go out there if I were you. Oh, please, Spike. She smiled over her shoulder at him with one hoof on the front door handle. You underestimate Ponyvillians. It's not like an ancient lie counter is going to tear this village down to its foundation. This is an absolute catastrophe, Dr. Hooves shouted with a 5 over his head. I can't even run my business without ponies glaring at me, Roseluck snarled, bearing a 9. Not to mention that these glowing numbers are scaring off our livestock whenever we try to feed them, Carrot Top added with a shimmering 7. Every merchant pony who walks into this town turns and runs away as soon as these stupid numbers appear over their heads. Ace shook an angry hoof and grumbled. How will I ever get my new tennis racket? Can't you do something about this, Mayor? The mayor, suddenly a jittery pony with her bifocals lopsided and her mane a mess, trembled from behind a podium erected just above the front steps to the town hall building in the center of Ponyville. I am sending letters out to the areas outside of the affected radius of this spell, contacting the appropriate powers that be. She gulped. I am asking for help from the most powerful magicians in Canterlot to come and lend us their aid. She smiled nervously. We should have this problem fixed in no time. Oh yeah? The ponies grumbled. And why should we believe you? Huh? Oh, yes. Well... She adjusted her collar as her twitching eyes darted up. A glaring 72 hovered over her skull. You see, the thing is, I had a meeting with some delegates from Trottingham this morning. Not to mention dozens upon dozens of papers to sign, scrolls to be stamped. The usual routine of running a town. And yes, well, I'm always doing what needs to be done and saying what needs to be said for the best interest of this village's success. The resulting chime sounded off like a gunshot as her 72 became a 73. She blinked at the crowd, sweating profusely. How does lowering taxes this year by 0.2% sound? She produced with a cracked grin. Every pony resumed yelling, spitting, and howling in anger. An entire cluster of them crowded the edge of the town hall, just inches away from knocking the podium over. Across the town square, Big Mac and Caramel trotted side by side, lugging wagons full of apples across the village. Sporting relatively low numbers, they glanced at the riotous scene. "Hey, Big Macintosh." Caramel turned and smirked slyly at his huge red cousin. "You notice how all the mare's numbers are nearly twice as high as the stallions?" Big Mac's lips curved around the stalk of hay he was chewing. "Yup." "Ponies, ponies, please," the mayor shouted, waving her forelimbs. "There's no need for all this bedlam. I already told you that I've called out for the most powerful magicians in... But don't we already have Equestria's most powerful unicorn of magic right here in Ponyville? Yeah, the element of magic. Where is she? See if she can help us." The mayor chewed on her hoof. Hello. Hey, excuse me. Whoops, pardon me. I'm so sorry." A lavender shape threaded her way through the thick group. With a panting breath, Twilight Sparkle ascended the platform and stood beside the town's leader. "Hello, Mayor. So sorry to steal the spotlight." "Oh, please." The frazzled old pony gave a twitching smile and backtrotted, gesturing towards the podium. "By all means." The ponies finally cheered, thunderously clapping their hooves against the ground as Twilight stood at the podium. She ran a hoof nervously through her bangs and gave an awkward smile. "I'm so sorry that I didn't bring any note cards today. I've been busy riding back and forth with Princess Celestia and studying up on this most recent situation, and I didn't want to cut any corners." "Just tell us what's going on already," several ponies muttered in approval of the one crier's shout. "All right then." Ahem. Twilight took a deep breath. "A group of young fillies accidentally dug up an ancient artifact from the era of the Trudian Empire. Rather than get into the elaborate history of the totem's ancient origin, let me just confirm that this object is responsible for, well, the numbers that are floating around town. Ever since this totem emitted a magical burst across the landscape, a circular area encompassing Ponyville and the surrounding farmlands have been affected. That's why ponies dwelling within the spell's range and those from outside who've been trotting into town have had numbers appearing over their heads." "Then why don't we just smash it?" a pony grunted. "Yeah," chanted dozens more in unison. "Please, please," Twilight waved her hooves. "Hear me out." She bore a concerned expression as she went on. "Destroying this artifact won't stop the spell. It might only make things worse. So would transporting it across the kingdom or jostling it in any minor way. The only possible solution to reversing what's happened is if a more powerful counterspell is cast. Now, I'm only an apprentice in equestrian sorcery, and I'm not strong enough to take the numbers away." She smiled hopefully. "To that effect, I've had my assistant Spike send a letter to Princess Celestia. She's since written back to me, expressing her deepest concerns over the situation here in Ponyville. However, she's currently busy in Baltimore, helping the ponies there recover from a terrible storm that has damaged and destroyed many of their homes. So, all things considered, she will likely not show up until 2 days from now at the earliest." Every pony groaned and sighed in dissatisfaction. Several glaring eyes swam across the already sullen scene. Twilight flinched back from the unhappy crowd, her ears drooping. She heard a hissing whisper off to the side and turned to look. The mayor was gazing at her with wide eyes, gesturing towards the crowd. "Please, Miss Sparkle," she hoarsely exclaimed. "Say something positive, something that will ease their fears. You can't give them nothing but bad news." Twilight looked at the crowd, at the silver numbers of various quantities hovering over their heads. The ponies all gazed at her. She sighed, leaning limply on the podium. "I am so very sorry, my dear ponies, but that's the best news that I can give you. We simply can't do anything to make these numbers disappear until Celestia gets here. We will have to keep the totem in safekeeping and wait for 2 days, maybe even more before the artifact can be purged of its power." Every pony grumbled and trotted away, kicking at the dirt in frustration. The mayor face-hoofed, slumping to her haunches with an anguished groan. Twilight smiled eagerly. "But it's not the end of the world. Considering the nature of this ancient magic, we're lucky that it has not affected us in any truly adverse way. We've dealt with worse situations when Ponyville was visited by both Nightmare Moon and Discord, and yet we've managed to pull through. What this means is that we're far stronger than we give ourselves credit. What's more, we're all in this together. So let's be glad that we can trust each other, to be truthful. Her words dripped off as the grim crowd parted like an oily sea. Every pony refused to look at one another. "What am I going to do?" the mayor whimpered, rocking back and forth as she cradled her head in her hooves. "My career, my entire legacy is crumbling to bits." "Well, Twilight turned and fidgeted. "Just be honest with every pony, Miss Mayor. That's what matters, right?" "Really, Miss Sparkle?" The old pony gave her a dull stare as she got up and trotted towards the front doors of Town Hall. "Do you think a pony with my power would have gotten to where she is now by being perfectly candid?" Twilight opened her mouth to say something. The door to the Town Hall closed coldly behind the mayor, leaving the unicorn alone with her Zero in the abandoned heart of Ponyville. She sighed.